Off. Am I recording? My Zoom thing now. There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We're recording. Welcome everybody to May. We're still in April showers, unfortunately, but hopefully that changes very soon. Like I mentioned, if you're not on Slack, you should jump in, check it out. It's a great place to ask questions. There's a diehard group in there that is always chatting and eager to jump into details, problems, whatever you're interested in. And with that, let me see if I can get us through. I want to introduce Mark. Mark's going to be talking about security as a feature, which I love. I love this idea that security doesn't always have to be a drain on the organization and something that people think of as negative or, necessary. I think it's something that can really benefit organizations, but that's me putting words in Mark's mouth, and I don't want to do that. So he's going to speak for himself really soon. But first of all, I want to let everybody know about our sponsors. CloudBees, if you haven't heard about them, you should check them out. They're kind of a full service CI/CD platform for build and deliver in the software SDLC. They do a lot. They're pretty big. You might recognize them from a t-shirt. Thanks, Igor. Good to see. And JFrog, of course, they're in the artifact business, but they do a lot of other things extremely well. So if you're interested in building and shipping containers, artifacts, check them out. They've been excellent to us, and they're always sharing new information. So if you're curious about that world, Baruch, who's talked at the meetup multiple times, is always on YouTube, always talking about really interesting and important stuff. So check them out. As I mentioned, there's the garbage can logo.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah.
So full service mascot presentation today. And I just want to tease next month. Next month, we have Aurora talking about serverless delivery pipelines on Google Cloud. So something that, even if you're in the Amazon world, is pretty valuable to see, especially coming from somebody who's as qualified as Aurora. So looking forward to that. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and hand off to Mark, and he can kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. So today I'll be talking about security as an awesome product feature. And Steve, could you just give me a nod that my slides are sharing properly? Terrific. Thank you. So I used to work for a consulting organization building and delivering software systems to clients, and was kind of the guy who championed security a lot of times, and decided I was going to go do more of a security pure play. So now I'm working for Qualys as a security solutions architect. It's a job that I'm really enjoying, and get to talk a lot more about security, which is kind of one of my favorite things. So I have been doing building systems for quite a while now. I have spoken at SRECon in Dublin, and spoken at Cloud Native Security Con just this past February. I've been building systems for 25 plus years, so longer than I want to admit. I enjoy digging into things as well as talking and building the high level architecture, and talk about the high level architecture, with the senior executives of corporations. So the nexus of this talk was from a security podcast, Breaking Down Security. And if you're not, if you're a podcast aficionado, the Breaking Down Security podcast is a great podcast to listen to. It's by Brian Brake, B-R-A-K-E. So it's Breaking, B-R-A-K-I-N-G, Down Security. Brian is actually, I'm in the Seattle area, in the Seattle suburbs. Brian is also, and So I enjoy listening to his podcast. And 3 or 4 years ago, he was interviewing a friend of his, Noid, and I don't have Noid's name written down here. I apologize for that. But what Noid said in the podcast was teams want to work on awesome features, not security. And what they don't realize is that security is an awesome feature. And that's what got me to thinking about this product, this presentation, is how do I convince development teams that security is something that should be first and foremost as you're developing your product, that it's a feature just like everything else, and you need to trade it off. So we'll talk about ways to do that. But first of all, let's talk about the word awesome. And why did I choose the word awesome? Because its etymology comes from essentially the comparative phrase of something is better than something else. So a feature is awe-inspiring, or a feature is less awe-inspiring, or a feature is just blah. And so what we want to do is think about what are those features in our product that inspire the most awe or the most thought and the most positive outcomes. And so that's what we're looking for, are remarkable features, important, excellent features for your product. And security is just one of those features. And so when we think about that, what takes a feature from being just a normal feature to something that's remarkable or excellent or just awesome? And that's the value that you find in a feature. And so teams have to have methods of evaluating the trade-offs between particular, what the worth of a feature is, what's the value of a feature. And they're going to work on the more valuable features first. And so what are the ways they do that? Well, they can make relative comparison between features. They can use monetary methods to choose what features make sense, which features are going to make us the most money or save us the most money. So, if we implement caching, can we cut down on the cost of using our database and save money, and therefore the lifetime value, the lifetime cost of a customer lowers? Can we add something that brings in more customers or makes a customer more sticky, increases the lifetime value of a customer? Then, if you're not using those value methods, there are checklists and frameworks that you can follow that says we've got to do these things in order to be compliant. Finally, there's perceived value of a particular feature. How do users perceive the value of a feature? Let's talk about each one of these in turn. So relative valuations for security features come into essentially, things that are requirements for your product. If you're in the banking sector, you have a bunch of regulatory mandates. If you're doing anything that's got, sort of social commentary on it, you've got a whole variety of mandates. If you're collecting data from users, you've got a variety of privacy mandates that you've got to follow. So the California Privacy Act, the European Privacy Acts, all of those things are pretty much required for you to do in order for your product to be successful. Then you've got other important requirements, things that people tell you should do, such as TLS and using up-to-date cipher suites, using the most recent version of TLS. These are things that make sense. Using OAuth 2 for security, for identification of your users, because that's a known standard and we know that it works. Multi-factor authentication, we hear that all the time. These are things that are relatively easy to do and they bring a lot of value back. And then there are things like the nice to haves, like you may or may not need an application firewall depending on the amount of traffic that's coming into your application or the threat posture of your application. If nobody knows that if your user base is very small, it's unlikely that there will be a some kind of threat to your application. So having a firewall up may or may not be important to you like it would be for somebody else. So next, if we think about like monetary valuations, what scale do we use for there? So if you go back a bit and you use the various breach reports, you can come up with figures about if we have a breach, it's going to cost us this amount of money. So on average, $164 per record, and we have, 60,000 users. So do that math. That's a lot of money that just sort of disappears. You also have regulatory requirements that, rather than just the cost of what it takes to clean up a breach, you might be subject to various fines and so forth. The GDPR fine is a minimum of $20 million or 4%. So the one problem you've got with these very large numbers is that beyond a certain point, they're meaningless, right? So if you're running a website and your revenue on that website is, a couple $100,000 a month, a few $1,000,000 a year, because you're just getting started out, having a 20 million euro fine, which is, $25 million, it's absurd to think about that, because that's the company's just gone, boom. So it's difficult to use that as a trump card versus other things that you want to do. So if you're, even the breach report, $4 million for the cost of a breach, average cost of a breach, yours probably won't be that high, but those costs are huge. So that may be something where, if you raise that kind of number, you get a lot of pushback because nobody wants to think that that's a possibility. So you've got to, season this metric kind of to taste. The other thing is checklists and frameworks. There are a lot of checklists and frameworks out there for you to go to. So Gartner and just about every other advisory agency that you look at has got some kind of 12 things you've got to get right for successful DevSecOps. The 12 security controls you've got to put in your system. The top 5 things that need to be done now. The OWASP top 10. There are plenty of these frameworks and so forth that you can possibly use to look at, to give you direction on this. One of the frameworks that I like that I think is underplayed is the OWASP Open SAM model. So this is the Open Security Architecture and Maturity model from OWASP. It's one of their lesser known projects of the OWASP organization. But if you look at it, it's a really great framework that gives you a lot of things that you can do and gives you the ability to, see where they fit together. And I think you'll recognize many of these things from security, strategy and metrics, threat assessment, secure deployment, security testing, like all of these things make sense. This is broken down much deeper when you go into the Open SAM model. It's north of 100 pages. If you read through this thing, it can be pretty thick, but I think it's excellent for figuring out where you are versus where you want to be and where you need to be. So it's the under-publicized OWASP project that should have a lot more attention focused on it. Then there's perceived value, and this is something that is, I think, is really kind of important, particularly as a product owner, particularly as a developer. How is security perceived by your end users? And so what I've done here is there's a couple of scientific articles or academic research papers that are out there. One is the awareness of network security and customer value, the first link. And, their conclusion is that awareness of security in the network is a factor in determining customer value. Customers do value it. There are a lot of factors they value, but this is one of them. It's a significant and measurable factor. However, what you'll find is that the supplier, typically the software developer, is going to have a better understanding of security than the end user, which is unfortunate because it would be nice if end users were perceiving security as more valuable and driving the software developers. And what I'm looking for here is this notion that as a product owner or as a developer, if you look for it, you will find that your customers are actually valuing security, and that's a feature that they would like before they get dark mode or before they get the next button that does something else. is knowing that the security is built into the product is something that's important to them and should be important to you as a developer. In some cases, certain security features are required. TLS over for your website and for your API calls is critical, but there are other security features as well. Knowing that your company is taking the right measures to secure the data that you are responsible for. I think that what we're looking for is signals from the customer that's important to them. This next one is specific to the mobile banking industry, where security obviously makes sense. And there they concluded that for users, the guarantee of an enhanced security is important to a users, and they'll make buying decisions, choices between mobile banking networks, mobile banking applications, based on their perception of the security of the banking application. On the other hand, we still have, companies like Robinhood and publicstock.com, I forget what the other one is, and they're touting their ability to trade crypto. So, that's sure, if you want to believe that crypto is safe, go ahead. I think it detracts from security, but that's a personal opinion. Anyhow, clearly customers are going to make a value choice based on in the banking industry based on the security of their assets. So how do you, as a development organization, enable your company to take a look and to see the value and build the value into your product, right? So we've looked at ways of measuring that value, but you now need to, besides just that framework, how do you build that culture that says we're going to spend time thinking about security, measuring it, and building it into our product? And one of that is basically by building a culture of security, talking about it, and empowering teams to take on and make choices like security for themselves, and finding champions. So let's dig into each one of these projects. And again, OWASP, another small project from OWASP, is the security culture project. I think this is another project that's probably it's not as complete and fleshed out as the OpenSAM project. You'll find that the OpenSAM project is a pretty mature project. You download that report, look through it, read through it. It's very solid. The security culture report, it's getting started. There are a few people that are working diligently on it. It could use some help. If this is an area of yours, I would recommend going an interest of yours, I would recommend looking up this project at OWASP and joining and offering to help. I think that the direction is right. It just needs more support to get off the ground. But coming back to my point, part of what enables security is empowered teams that can do this for themselves, and agile methods empower that. So we as DevOps practitioners are borderline agilistas, agile practitioners, not borderline. We are agile practitioners. We just don't have an agile title or a Scrum Master title, but that's what we do. Is we are constantly evolving and using feedback to perform our work. But empowered teams that really have autonomy, they can move faster and solve their own problems. They're not incumbent upon others. They can collaborate, and because of that, they can figure out what's the best value for the product, and security can become an important part of that. And so one of the things that I see is that agile teams that are truly agile, not just agile in name only, security becomes a much more important part. The security champion's voice gets heard, and people are able to support that voice in that direction. So I like to look at agile and delivering security as an incremental process. There was a book that came out about 2 years ago by Kip Boyle. He used to be a CISO for an insurance company. The name of his book is Fire Doesn't Innovate. The point of that book is that cybersecurity for the insurance industry, they are able to mitigate lots of risks like fire risks, because fire behaves the same way in 2023 as it did in 1823. So 200 years of, and the same way in 23 BC, fire behaves the same way. It's not changing. The cybersecurity problem, on the other hand, is changing. If you were in this industry 5 years ago, 10 years ago, things would look a lot different than the way they look now. And in 5 years and in 10 years, it will be different. And so his point is that for cybersecurity, you've got to be able to change. You've got to be able to innovate the way that you do security. That leads me back to agile methods. Agile methods are constantly doing iterative, innovative work. They're constantly evolving in the way that they're working. So you've all seen the infinity diagram for DevOps. I kind of prefer this diagram, which is basically to get from a product idea to an actual working product. You go through a few simple phases: planning, building, verifying, deploying, and observing that the product that you built was actually the product that you expected. And that observation leads you back to reconstructing, modifying your plan, and going forward. And so you go through this loop, and the faster you can cycle through this loop, the faster you can create and deliver value to your customers. So if you have monthly releases, you can only innovate so fast. Whereas if you have weekly releases or daily releases, then you can iterate a lot faster. The first CISO at Etsy was horrified when he found out that Etsy, and this was in like 2014, when he was first hired, he was horrified to think that developers were releasing software multiple times a day, because he found it, his thought was, how am I ever going to control that? How am I ever going to, get an opportunity to put security into something that fast? What he came to realize after about 6 months was releasing multiple times per day meant that he had an opportunity to deliver security multiple times a day. So he could incrementally deliver security multiple times per day. And that was an opportunity for a security organization. Once you got into that flow, you could innovate on security often. So that's where we come back to the iterative approach, which follows from agile methodologies, is that you don't have to do everything all at once, right? You can start with just that upper left corner of thinking about security architecture. And you don't have to complete security architecture in one go. You can make your best effort. And then you can come back to it and adjust your security architecture again and again through every iteration. And you can iterate through in each phase can have a slightly different bit of iteration. So while you're thinking about your security architecture in the planning phase, in your monitoring phase, you can update how your event capture methodology, how you're measuring event rates. And, event rates, it's performance stuff. What's it got to do with security? Well, event rates are really interesting for security, in that if suddenly your login page is getting used a whole lot more than it used to, that's an interesting thing to know. Typically, users log in and then they visit lots of different pages. And so you see one login for, 30 or 40 page views. But if suddenly you have even parity where your login page is being used as often as there are page views of the rest of your application, there's something going on. There's somebody essentially attempting to do a password stuffing attack, possibly. There could be lots of things. Maybe your login page is poorly designed and users are finding it very difficult to figure out how to log in. There are a lot of different reasons for that, but that's an interesting security signal that you would be interested in. And so, and each one of these things, like for static application scanning, like you may implement that over multiple iterations, just because it can't all be done in one single iteration. So this is, and if you look at the OpenSAM project from OWASP, the one that I recommended earlier, you'll find that there's a whole lot in the OpenSAM project. But as I said, if you take each square in that system, assess your maturity now, and then work on the things that would move your security forward, then you can add each one of those little requirements into an iteration and move forward iteratively and make your progress up the OpenSAM maturity levels across all of those things over time. So you don't need to solve it all at once. You can slowly fix each piece as you need to. So what you're working on then is building application trust. And I think this is important, that you're building a system that theoretically has business value. Like your business is spending money, resources, paying you salary, buying computers or AWS instances because they perceive that there's business value to this system. And you can't realize that value if the system can't be trusted. So I've seen a number of systems in the past where people just didn't use them because they didn't trust them for a variety of different reasons. So it's important that information security be part and parcel of that trust that get gains that's in the system. Not just that it computes the values correctly, but also that those values are properly stored and they'll be there tomorrow, not lost because of a DR incident, and not shared with people that it shouldn't be shared with. That's all information security. Steve alluded to this earlier. This notion of non-functional requirements. So somewhere in ITSM, so the IT system management theory of ITIL, the infrastructure technology library of management, right? So ITSM, ITIL are two bodies of knowledge around how to deliver information technology services. And in there, as they talk about building systems, they talk about how systems have a bunch of non-functional requirements, things like security and monitoring and other requirements, maintainability, configuration files, all of which they say are non-functional. They don't add business value. They're not business features, so they're called non-functional. I think that's just an incredibly horrible term that moves a whole bunch of stuff just to the wrong place in your mind. If you call your security requirements non-functional, you're delegating them to second-class citizen, and they should be first-class citizen. As many organizations have demonstrated, security is a prime mover, can be a differentiator for your product. One of the things that I think that AWS, when they're running instances, they've spent a lot of time in securing their data centers with SOC 2 requirements and so forth, as well as assuring customers that when I run an instance on a virtual machine in an AWS data center, somebody else running a virtual machine on that same instance, the same hunk of hardware in the data center, those two systems are not sharing data. There's no way for that cross. That's a huge requirement for anybody doing that. That's not a non-functional feature. That's something that's required from the get-go, knowing that if you're going to go use a cloud instance, your cloud instance is only viewable by you and nobody else. So that's a key requirement. So that's, this application trust. It's important to have trust in the application if it's going to be used. So in sort of summary, this talk ended up, I guess, ending a little sooner than I expected, but your organization needs to truly empower development teams in order to be able to deliver security. These teams have to be able to take on the responsibility and the authority to deliver security the right way. And you need to pose security requirements as product requirements. They're not non-functional requirements. They're first-order requirements. You need to find developers who think of security as a first-order requirement and not just as something that's an afterthought. And then work iteratively. Don't try to do everything at once because you'll never get there. You'll stall out your development, and the things that limit your ability to deliver are going to be pushed aside. And then because security was that thing, it gets pushed aside. Don't be that way. Deliver small increments of security. Be happy with every small win for security that you can get, and that's how you'll be able to move the product forward to a highly secure environment. So, any questions from the listeners? Did
I
anything show
haven't
up in
seen
chat?
any yet, but feel free
Okay.
to toss something in the chat if you've got
Feel free to
question.
unmute. I do have some references here while you're thinking of questions. If you haven't read the book Accelerate or the books by Gene Kim, these are worthwhile. The book Accelerate talks about the things that drive DevOps. Yeah, George, you said you got a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, the frameworks we're talking about that help you iterate or be more agile and security is interesting. My most recent experience with large enterprise companies is they're still sticking to a very kind of release-based security both assessment and approval process. You know, they want the certain SOX compliance. Once that's done, they're happy. They'll get to it iteratively, like they'll accept that, but they basically want that, and then they'll have their enterprise architecture team review your architecture and make decisions on it. Have you seen big enterprises becoming more flexible or more agile recently? Is that a trend you're seeing, or what does that look like?
Yes. So large organizations can train and can get better. So one of my clients was a large telecommunications company. And when I first started, they did quarterly releases, and they were agonizing. So, you know, they would start essentially Friday at about 10 p.m. at night, and they would work until Sunday midday doing a quarterly release and updating like the vast majority of the systems in their systems. And so people, you know, we're in the office camping out. You'd bring sleeping bags and stuff. And the first time that I did this, I said never again with my teams. And so what we ended up doing was building a process by which we would release incremental software without telling anybody. So we had, there was a patch and defect process. And so we took requirements from the customer and delivered them as patches or defects to the product over a year. And we made our customer wildly happy, while at the same time getting the worst rating for delivering software in the organization, because our software was riddled with bugs, or we wouldn't have had to do so many patches throughout the year. We had like 290 patches in the year and not one major release. So, well, no, one major release, the first one that I attended. And then we didn't release in any of the other quarterly releases because all of our stuff was feature flagged and set up so that, you know, we released it weeks in advance and just turned on the feature flag before we went home for the weekend, and it was all good when it came back. So that's one way. And what happens is there were enough of those guerrilla organizations that happened that the organization began to figure out this doesn't make sense. And they figure out that eventually somebody at the top has an epiphany that your project management organization or your release management organization has exactly one lever they can pull. And that's that release management. Their only lever they can pull is to say no to a release. They don't add any other value. And so if they don't say no once in a while, what good are they? So they have to say no. And when some executive figures out that that's just dumb, they'll get rid of release management organizations and move to a different model. It takes a while. It takes a lot of data to get there. It takes some peer pressure, right? So it took this telecommunications company recognizing that their peers in the marketplace were innovating faster than they were. And so they figured it out. It does take a while, and it does sort of take a champion. It takes some executive somewhere to figure out that there's a bunch of dumb processes, but there will remain a spectrum. It's very easy to be a person who shows up and says things that we have to do, you know, we have to have a full security audit before you can release this software. And while that makes a lot of sense on the surface, it doesn't allow software to flow, right? Having to have all of the security problems fixed before you can release a piece of software, it means that you're going to spend a bunch of time trying to fix every security problem before you do your next release, which could be months. And that's, what seemed like a helpful, sensible suggestion turns out to be bad. And those people will crop up everywhere. And you've got to build the case that iterative methods work better, peer reviews and other, where Agile is going is important. So I think I've kind of belabored that. As a security consultant working with many organizations, I see that there's a huge spectrum, and there still is, right? There are very large organizations that are pretty darn agile, and then there are very large organizations where I see them implementing our product as in this, it's got to be a full gated, it's got to pass Qualys before we release. And so you're going to find the spectrum. What you can do is, wherever you are on that spectrum, work to incrementally move the bar forward.
So basically, in order to kind of cheat around that heavyweight process, you need a very lightweight patch process, right? Where there isn't a lot of overhead when you're releasing one of those 200.
Yes.
Patches. And did you ever have an instance then where you released a patch? Because I've been in that situation before too. So I'm slipping in a feature and then something goes wrong and they're like, hey, wait a minute, where did this come from? This was supposed to be a patch about X. Did you have some sort of understanding with the client at least, so they're kind of on the same page, or was it just totally on your end doing that?
Yes, we started out on our own, and then sort of reached across to our clients, our internal clients, and said, you guys need to provide some cover for us, because we know we're going to run afoul of stuff. And they were on board. Like they saw that we could deliver, and they said, as long as you're delivering, we're good. We're in this together. And that's the thing you want to build that relationship, right? So I've had the inverse happen, where we did something for a client and we told them up front that, hey, this is going to affect a certain group of people badly. We think we can mitigate some of that, but they're still going to feel some pain. And when that group felt pain, our partner backed away and said, basically didn't give us the support. And so we ended up having to reverse that. So that was a learning lesson for us. And we worked differently afterwards. And it we built trust with them, but then that trust wasn't returned. And so that was a learning organization, a learning environment for us. So yeah, you need a way to release more often, and you definitely need support from people that can, that actually have the power to support you in that. And that's two things. And so you do have to spend some time thinking about building those relationships. It's not like you've got to play politics. You just need to think about relationships, and then executing your best, right? Digital Equipment Western Research Organization used to have a saying. It's like, it doesn't matter if you make a big mistake, just so long as you don't make a big mistake twice, the same mistake twice. So, iterative is about learning, and your data should tell you that, sometimes things don't work the way you expect. Being responsive to that is open. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I think I've kind of talked around it, but the fast release process that you mentioned is important. And then, yes, you need to build a relationship with somebody so you're not the only lone voice in the wilderness.
Anybody else have a question?
I'm wondering, like, it may be hard to compare. Imagine a team that's developing like a startup, a new project. It's not a big enterprise, and they build features, and
Right.
you suggest to treat security as features. So then, is there a healthy ratio between functional features and security features?
Well, security features are functional features, so 100%. But typically security is so I've sat in on the ISSA CISO roundtables. One of the things that I learned from that is that most security officers are spending between 5 to 10% of their budget on security. And so that might be a reasonable approach to security features, but if you've been ignoring security for a while, it may be much higher for many iterations, a year or more, where security is stuff that's happening at 50% of what you're doing.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Yeah, thank you. That's very good monetary calculation. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's a rule of thumb. It's certainly not less than 0. So I talked about Accelerate. The other book that he wrote, the Phoenix Project, you've probably heard of, as well as the Unicorn Project. Both books are interesting reading. They're based on the theory of constraints, and so if you read the Phoenix Project, you should go back and read a book called The Goal by Edwin Goldratt, which is about the same theory of constraints but for manufacturing. And I think it's a little bit easier to understand the manufacturing problems that get solved. Once you understand, like with physical devices, it's kind of easier to see, and then you can make that mapping to software. And so I think that if you have read The Goal, then the Phoenix Project makes a lot more sense. I and a partner of mine a couple of years ago developed this DevOps efficiency matrix, which is just a way of doing an efficiency level. I don't like the word maturity, but how efficient are you at DevOps? So that's something that's worth looking at. The other one, I mean, just in security, the threat modeling, designing for security by Adam Shoshak is still the go-to book for building a security architecture. This, it's not everything around security, but if you're building a system, if you're a startup, spending a week to read this book and understand it is well worth your time and effort. So these are two things that I recommend. One is about, agile methods, and the other is about, security purely. So I thank you for your time. If you've got more questions, I'm happy to stick around here, but
yeah, I have another question. May I?
Yeah.
So maybe it's like very specific, but essentially on every project, we build DevOps pipeline, and on every project, we try to figure out what tools do we use for security. Like, is it like a dependency scanning for code, and then we have SonarQube, and then we have Snook, and then what are we doing with later testing on like application that's running? Is there a like ideal collection of those tools? So like maybe, I don't know, like on GitOps, on GitHub Actions, for instance, a pipeline that has all of that, and we just use it instead of every team like building their own thing and spending tons of time on that.
There's probably many collections. I don't think there's any one single collection that's right for everybody. So one of the things that we talk about as sort of as the next level of DevOps is what we call a software factory, which is we have a factory which we're using to build the software that runs our enterprise. And that factory is custom built. So I say there are two architectures for every application. There is the application architecture, how it actually works and provides the functionality for the end users. And then there is the delivery and deployment architecture, and that is the software factory. How do you build and deploy that software and get it running? That architecture is as important as the software architecture, the application architecture, and the two go hand in hand. If you'll go back to a physical factory model, when Ford creates a factory to build cars, they build a factory to build a certain type of car, and you can't go to the factory that's building, I don't even know what Ford models there are now, but you can't go to the factory that's building the Ford SUV and build a pickup truck in that same factory. They're not the same. There's a different process for it. And you can't build the SUV in the pickup truck factory. It's just you don't have the right set of tools and so forth. So when you're looking at this, there is no one architecture, no deployment architecture that's good for every software architecture. So this is something that you need to sort of build up incrementally, step by step, and the two are symbiotic together. So while I wish there was, that would be great. I know at one time there was the periodic table of DevOps that was run by, right? There isn't a periodic table of DevSecOps or SecOps in the same way. There are, it would be nice if there was an easier way to discover tools that might or might not fit into your pipeline, but I haven't seen that yet. It's more a discovery of, this kind of approach, who's solved this problem? What products have you used? And then people chime in. So sounds like an opportunity for us to create a website. So I know Qualis's, yeah, sure. I know Qualis's product, like we have a container product. And one of the things that we've discovered with it is that for a number of different types of enterprise architectures, our product kind of grinds their gears, our customers' gears. It doesn't mesh well into the way they do their stuff. And so we're iterating on that right now with a new type of scanner for containers, and just to more smoothly fit into more operations. So again, it's this, what model works well and how do you iterate on those architectures.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Like the idea of software factories is pretty cool. And delivering deployment architecture, like sometimes people think it's just DevOps pipeline, like CI/CD pipeline that you build once, but it's not just like compile, create, and build and deploy. It should be much more.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot more that goes into it. Yeah, definitely. And there's, just because there are many different facets to the software you're delivering, is that there are ephemeral bits, there are persistent bits, there are, just a variety of different parts, components. And so each one of those needs a slightly different method of pushing forward. If you have a full service web shop where you've got stuff that needs to be delivered to a content delivery network is different than the way that you're delivering the sort of the back-end server pieces, and then the API pieces, and then your persistent data storage. Like each one of those has a different operational cadence and therefore may require a different pipeline. And so now you're not running one pipeline, you're running many. And the more that one of my clients had, thousands of applications, and they had one pipeline for all the 1,000. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince my customer, as the owner of DevOps, you need more than one pipeline, because a lot of your, in particular, their iOS app that they were running was very different, had a very different build pipeline, and they'd carved that off, but they're like, no more. I'm like, yeah, more. You basically have, there are only three in computer science. There are only three numbers: 0, 1, and lots. So, and I said, the moment that you went beyond 1, you are now in the realm of lots, and now you needed to figure out how you're going to deal with that.
Thank you.
All right, Mark, thank you for the time. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing and sticking around for questions.
Sure. No, it's great conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hope everybody else enjoyed that and will join us next month to talk about serverless delivery pipelines.
Sorry, just a quick, if you don't mind, if I could direct a question towards you, Steve, very quickly, not to take from the presentation.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier, just at the start, I was actually referred here by a recruitment officer for cybersecurity. I told them, hey, I'm looking for this and that. And they told me go into DevOps. It's the best place to start for the meetings. And I didn't know if there was a certain procedure to go about it or a portal, fill up information or something, but just want to let everybody know, hey, looking for entry-level positions within the realm of cybersecurity at the moment.
Well, I think you could probably get started on Slack. We don't have like a portal for careers, but there's another meetup called DevOps Matters, I believe. DevOps Exchange,
DevOps Exchange, okay.
that is in person, and it's run by a recruitment agency. So it's more focused on hiring, I think. And you might find that that's a good resource.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And it was a wonderful presentation, Mark. For someone like me who doesn't have much experience, just hearing it and seeing how it works up there, I'm like, okay, so this is what I have to get ready for, to sort of fight off, CEOs and be like, hey, you need to put more money in this. We need this. We need incrementals.
Yeah. Good. Glad it inspired you. Thank you.
See you folks next month.
See you. Thank you.